Morning and welcome to the March General Membership Meeting for the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness. My name is Jody. I use she, her pronouns. We have our whole team here, minus our fearless leader who is off celebrating her father's birthday. So we hope she's having a great time in New York. Happy you all are here to be with us. Please keep introducing yourselves in the chat. We love to see names, pronouns, where you're from, how you're associated with the coalition. We're really good about checking the chat for comments and questions as well. If you're feeling up for it, we love to see faces on cameras, but no, that's not always accessible to folks. So if you want to stay off of the recording, just put everything into the chat. You'll only be included in the recording if you come off mute. And we do put this on YouTube, and Tim does the amazing blog that he always does with all of the resources. So all of this information will be available later for you all. So we have some amazing folks from the United Way King County here to talk about prep resources, and this is going to be really applicable and wonderful free resources for a lot of you on the call and a lot of the folks you work with. We've got state representatives Bateman, Peterson, Macri, and Senator Kuderer here to give us a little wrap-up ledge session, and then we'll have a little bit of time for our member and community announcements. If you need closed captioning, you should be able to find that at the bottom of your Zoom bar, and enable that is the word I'm looking for. And if you have any issues, reach out to one of us on the coalition and we'll see if we can't help you. You should be able to change your Zoom box name as well. And with that, if we can get to our mission, vision, and values. And I believe our beloved board member, Robin Koski, is going to read this for us. Are you able to read it, Robin?
Yes, I hope I'm not breaking up too much, but our mission is we mobilize our community to challenge systemic causes of homelessness and advocate for housing justice. Our vision is a region that acts on shared sense of responsibility to ensure that everyone has a home. And our values are equity, justice, and collective action. Thanks everybody for being here this morning.
Thank you, Robin. That was beautiful and wonderful. I appreciate you jumping in on that. So on that, we are going to get going because we have so much to share. So I'm going to hand it off to Tim to introduce our first guest.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jody. So I think that a lot of us are in this room together for a couple of different reasons. Some of us are big advocates for progressive legislative change. Folks like that are here for the legislative recap. I am also here for that. I'm excited for that. But we also are here to talk about near-term resources that can serve our service providers and those who they serve today. And on that topic, I think that tax prep is, for some, not always something that immediately comes to mind in terms of cash resources. And cash resources absolutely do come from getting tax prep done and getting your tax return through tax credits and other benefits that I'm excited to hear a little bit more about from our presenter from United Way King County, Casey Lantz. Casey, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So, do you want me to just start sharing my screen?
That would be great.
Sure. All right, let's see if I can get my video working. Maybe. I don't know. I don't see anything. Well, it doesn't appear to register that I'm here in front of this camera, so we're just gonna not do that, but I will share my screen.
Awesome.
Cool.
Great. I see your slides here. Thank you very much.
Cool. But yeah, my name is Casey Lantz. I'm from United Way of King County. I'm our outreach and relationship coordinator on the free tax team. Been on the team for about 4 years now. My pronouns are she, her. So yeah, the free tax program, what do we do? Well, we've been in the community for about 21 years now. We deploy all over the county and we prepare people's taxes for free. We're a IRS certified VITA program. Every year we do thousands of returns. So far this year we've done over 6,000. And usually we get a big push, not quite starting now, but starting next week. So we're kind of thinking we might end up over 10K, hopefully. But so this year we have 2 tiers of income eligibility for our services, which is $80,000 if you are single, or $96,000 if you are married, or married with dependents, or single with dependents. And that's just in an effort to serve as many people as we can, and in recognition of the fact that, low income these days might be close to, if not over, 6 figures. So since we're talking about super low income folks here, I figured I'd throw in a slide about what the filing requirements are, income filing requirements. So we don't need to like read through the slide in its entirety, but there's 2 different sort of income thresholds where someone would need to file their taxes, and one of them is if you are self-employed, then if you made $400 or more, you need to file. If you're sort of if you get income in other ways, through investments, through a W-2 income, interest, other stuff, the filing requirement is $12,950 for a single person under 65. And then these are the rest of the tiers. So it's just a good thing to know about, because if say you're on Social Security, but you don't have any other income and you don't have any withholding on your Social Security, you don't need to file. You can if you want to, but you don't need to. Or like, if you're on Social Security and you make like $2,000 painting stuff and selling it, you would need to file. But if you are, on Social Security, but you work like 1 day a week as a receptionist somewhere, you probably don't need to file. So it's just sort of good things to know about the filing requirement. Not everybody knows about it. But there are reasons you might file if you're below the filing requirement, which would be to get a refund. So that's one of the main reasons, is if you have withholding, and you're under the filing requirement, then you're pretty much guaranteed to get it back. So file, get your refund. Tax credits, as was mentioned earlier, tax credits, they're really one of the only ways that the US government does any direct cash distribution or any wealth redistribution when you think about it, through big tax credits. So I've helped people personally and said, hey, you're getting $8,000, you're getting $12,000. One year we had someone getting like over $20,000. I think the biggest we had was like over $40,000 because she was filing her back taxes. So tax credits can be really significant, especially nowadays. We have the Working Families Tax Credit. I think I have a slide on a bit. Some people need it for FAFSA. Some people need it to show compliance with tax laws when they're filing for citizenship. Some people need it to qualify for social services. And then in this particular instance, if we're talking about unhoused folks, they might need it to claim the economic impact payment from 2020 and 2021. So let's talk a bit about the Working Families Tax Credit. So this is a new credit. It was passed over 10 years ago, but it was actually implemented as of last year. And it is now a permanent tax credit. Well, you could call it a tax credit. It's really a refund of state sales tax. So it's a way of sort of addressing the regressive nature of the sales tax here in Washington, since we don't have an income tax. So it's sort of like, hey, you've paid a bunch of sales tax over the year, but you're low income, so you shouldn't be funding the state. Here's some of your money back. It uses similar rules to the earned income tax credit in terms of the income eligibility threshold. So it starts to taper down if you earn too much. But it doesn't have a phase-in, which is nice. So as long as you're within the income threshold, then you'll be eligible to claim the credit. But the requirements are that you're a Washington resident, you have earned income. So unfortunately, you can't get it if you don't have earned income. So like, there's lots of types of unearned income, like TANF and like interest income. All of those aren't considered earned income. So you need like earned income. And you also have to be between 25 and 65 years old. The threshold moves a little bit if you have a qualifying child. Just as a plug, we have been attempting and have failed this year to get an age expansion through Washington Senate. So if anybody's interested next year when we're trying again, please feel free to write letters because we need them to pass it because look, we get plenty of people working at younger than 25 and older than 65. And they need this cash distribution. But the amount received can range from $50 to $1,200. $50 would be for a single person. $1,200 is usually for like someone with dependents. And if you come to us and you file through us, we can apply for the tax credit directly when we're filing your federal return. But I mentioned the earned economic impact payment earlier. So this is the last year you can claim the 2020 economic impact payment. So that was the $1,200 and $800 sent out in 2020 as part of like the COVID stimulus checks. The only way to claim them is by filing your 2020 taxes. It was basically turned into a tax credit. So you don't need income from those years to have filed. You just need to file. So if you're wanting to come to us, or if someone is wanting to come to us who missed the payment, then they would just need their Social Security card, their photo ID, and we ask if they can bring proof that they haven't filed. You know, if they can't supply the proof, we can file anyway, but it might get complicated. So we would prefer some proof that they haven't filed for 2020 and 21. Because I believe the tool that lets you check about the stimulus payment is no longer around. But anyway, the deadline to claim this is May 17th, at least for those first two payments, so $1,200 and $800. It'll be, in terms of that second payment, the $1,400 from 2021, that deadline is going to be May 17th, 2025. So let's talk about where we are this year. This is a somewhat low resolution screenshot of a map showing where we are. These are all of the locations that we're operating out of. So we've got 19 of them. We've also got a virtual tax site. And if you're interested in seeing more information about what the specific hours for those sites are, the specific addresses, you can just visit our website. That's freetaxexperts.org. We also have a page on there that talks about language support. Some of our sites, we have folks on site who speak various languages. So we got a Russian interpreter working up here in Bellevue and Redmond. So we've got options. So what do you need when you come to a site? We need your Social Security card or your ITIN for everybody on the return. This is just a IRS identity like fraud prevention measure. Photo ID of some kind. DMV is obviously great. Passport's great. If you don't have either, but you have some kind of photo ID, we can start to try to get creative. Bring all your tax documents, and if you want things direct deposited, your refund, then bring your account and routing number. We also have ITIN assistance available for anyone on the call who doesn't know what an ITIN is. It's individual taxpayer identification number. These are issued to folks who aren't otherwise eligible for Social Security card. Usually that's people who are here undocumented, but there might be other reasons why you get an ITIN. But they're kind of hard to get. They're a very discriminated against class, I would say. You know, a couple years ago, Congress just voted to expire all of them for no reason, really. So then everybody had to get theirs renewed at the same time. So the rules around ITINs are always changing. It's hard to find people who are able to do it, because normally to apply for an ITIN or to renew it, you need to mail your passport and a bunch of personal documents to the IRS for like a month plus and just sort of hope they get it back to you. But what's nice is if you see a certified acceptance agent, which we have at our sites, at the following sites, you don't have to do that. They'll fill out the form for you, they'll look at your paperwork for you, and they'll submit everything on your behalf, and that way you don't have to mail anything. So it's a good service, and it's entirely free of cost. The information for this is also on our website. And like I mentioned, we have virtual tax prep. This is something we're doing in partnership with Get Your Refund. We've been doing it since 2020, since the pandemic. We don't have a region restriction, so we serve folks all over the state. It works the same as in-person tax prep, more or less. So you upload your documents, you upload your photo ID, you upload your Social Security card, and we prepare the return. We call you on the phone, discuss the return with you before filing. So it works mostly the same. It's just not face-to-face, but it's another good option for folks who can't come to a tax site, but they have enough tech savviness to do this. They try to make this pretty low barrier, so you can do all of it on your phone, 100%. You don't need a computer to do this. You just take pictures with your phone, and we have a texting option or an email option to communicate with you. So, we can send you text to your phone, and then you can take pictures and of your documents, and then text them back to us. So it's pretty low. It does require a bit of tech savviness, but it is pretty low barrier for being a virtual option. And I'm the virtual lead, so I do a lot of the returns on virtual. But in terms of direct file options, if you don't need assistance, but you just want to know where to do it for free, I'm just going to plug two quick options, which are myfreetaxes.com, which is run by United Way Worldwide. So that's free and supports most return types, including ones that we are not able to prepare. And the IRS direct file, which is a new thing that the IRS has launched this year, and they're trying to plug. Right now, since it's a pilot year, they're only accepting simple returns. So, if you have only like W-2 income, perfect. They can do that for you. Hopefully, as the years go on, the rollout of direct file will get more robust, but that's kind of they're just keeping it simple for now. But you can file directly with the IRS now, so that's cool. But that pretty much wraps me up. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Thank you, Casey. We did have a question come in through the chat from Claire, and it was a question of how would someone go about proving that they haven't filed their taxes?
If you log on to the IRS website, there's the option, there's a couple things you can do. One is you can request a transcript. And for the years, and I believe there's an option just to say proof of filing. And I believe if you ask for a transcript of a year that you haven't filed for, it'll spit out the same result, which is saying that there's no record of you having filed for that year.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Casey?
I have a question
Sure.
that I think could relate to folks who are curious about how their clients who are undocumented or otherwise not a citizen could take advantage of this. I've heard from folks in the past that folks who are not citizens are less likely to file taxes, even if they do have earned income, out of fear that they would be subject to the public charge rule and potentially impact their ability to obtain citizenship in the future. Can you tell us if you know if any of that is possible?
Tax filing is not affected by the public charge rule. Neither is applying for an ITIN. I mean, look, you never know if a new administration is going to come in and upend the rules, but the IRS has worked really hard to keep ITINs a protected class. So yes, even though you are undocumented and you're creating an ITIN and you're communicating directly with the IRS has worked to make it safe. So it is not going, it has no relationship with public charge, at least as of the moment. We don't think it ever will. We haven't gotten the vibe that it will, so it should be safe. But no one who's undocumented should be afraid to file. We encourage them to file. The reality is they are paying taxes, and unfortunately, they're not really eligible for most refunds, although they are eligible for the working family tax credit, which is really cool. Forgot to mention that. But like, they may not be eligible for credits, but they're eligible to get their withholding back. So they should do that. There's no reason for them to be paying into the system if they can't benefit from it. They are unfortunately paying Social Security and Medicaid taxes. We're still sort of trying to figure out if we can get a refund for those the same way that foreign students can. We haven't quite figured out what the rule is on that yet, but they can at least get a refund for their federal taxes, so they should come in. And if say they're undocumented but their kids are citizens, then they are eligible for like child tax credit. So
nice, thank you for explaining that. Yeah, so you heard it from Casey. If you're working with an undocumented client, or if you know someone undocumented, there is not risk of interaction with immigration really by filing taxes, and ideally you should, so that you can get cash resources out of a tax return. Does anybody else have questions for Casey? Okay. Well, feel free to put them in the chat throughout the segment. If anyone has questions for Casey later on, I can collect them and shoot Casey an email, and we can get back to you. Thank you so much for being here.
yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure to be here. Happy to meet y'all, and thanks for all the good work you're doing in the community. And hey, we can do your taxes too if you haven't done them already. So feel free to come by one of our sites.
I might just do that. That's
Yeah,
awesome. Yeah. Thank you for the work that you do.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And as I believe Jody said in the chat, we are going to share these slides, as well as a recording of this and a recap, kind of high-level summary of this presentation on our blog, and then the recording to YouTube in a couple of days. So everyone will have access to these resources written down. I do want to encourage anybody who wants more information about the Working Families Tax Credit. Again, a uniquely accessible form of free cash, just by filing your tax refund, your tax return to get your refund, accessible by people who are not citizens, accessible by people who are low income and have as little as $1 in earned income for the year that they're filing. So accessible to so many people, not just for families, but for individuals as well. We want people to know about this tax credit. Last year was its first year around, and about 50% of potentially eligible people applied in Washington. So we really want people to know. Please check out the registration link in the chat. Or if you go to our homepage, homelessinfo.org, it's right there. Please register. It's next Thursday. And it is going to have accessible information to take away as well. So again, it'll be recorded, it'll have a blog summary, it'll be on YouTube. Please help to share this information. And with that, I would like to pivot over to Hallie to talk a little bit about our legislative advocacy for the year and looking forward to the next year.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to jump right in with our guests in just a moment. We're really happy to have some of our elected representatives and also some of our advocacy partners joining us today. Oh, great. I see Rep. Bateman coming in right now. Fabulous. So this legislative session was a short legislative session. If you are on our email list, you got lots of emails from us about it. Hundreds of you took action with us, so thank you. There were some really significant victories that came out of this session, and also some significant progress made on important bills that didn't quite make it to the finish line. And I won't talk too much more than that because we've got a lot of guests joining us. So I'm very pleased to welcome Representative Jessica Bateman from the 22nd Legislative District. Representative Bateman this year was a sponsor of House Bill 2113, which was a really important bill for us. It didn't quite make it to the finish line this year. It was one of two bills that would have prevented cities from discriminating against housing and shelter. So Representative Bateman, I will pass it off to you to talk a little bit about 2113 and other victories that you had this year, and then we'll have some questions and answers.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you today, and thank you for all of your work volunteering and advocating for housing for all Washingtonians, especially our most vulnerable. This year, I did introduce a piece of legislation that was kind of flew under the radar, I think. It was called the Housing Accountability Act, and it was a follow-up to my middle housing bill from 2023. Essentially, the challenge is that we have a culture and policies in Washington state that have granted authority to local governments to make exclusively their own zoning rules and laws, which prohibit many types of housing from being built in many of the areas within their cities, including really high opportunity and amenity rich areas. We all know that those are based in discriminatory policies of the past, and they don't deserve any kind of, they shouldn't be in any of our cities anymore in 2024. So after passing House Bill 1110 last year, which tells cities you have to legalize middle housing statewide, essentially eliminating single family zoning, what we don't have currently is a framework in place at the legislative level to actually hold cities accountable if they don't abide by state law. We have something called the Growth Management Hearings Board, which acts as a judicial body for land use challenges. But as I think you probably know, what we saw in Kenmore and what we've seen in many other cities in the state, there's a lot of local pressure that's anti-housing. And when that happens, local governments can buckle to that pressure and not do the right thing and not actually allow for the housing that is equitable and abiding by state law. So what the Housing Accountability Act would do would be that it would grant the Department of Commerce authority to oversee cities' comprehensive plans and their development regulations. It's not just what's in their plan, it's the corresponding development regulations that allow for the development of the housing that we say is supposed to be legal. They can legalize middle housing or permanent supportive housing, but then they can do things like add a whole bunch of regulatory barriers to actually accomplishing it, minimum setback requirements, height restrictions, lot size, all these things that actually make it infeasible to build the type of housing that is technically legal. So we needed a way to actually review that to ensure that not only are they abiding by the law, but they're actually making it feasible to construct the types of housing that the state has said you have to allow. It would provide a process for if cities are out of compliance, ramifications, including grant dollars that they would not be eligible for that they really need. Also publicly providing that information on Department of Commerce's website so everyone can see who's out of compliance. And then another mechanism called the Builder's Remedy, which is in a couple other states, including California, which simply says, if you're out of compliance and not abiding by the law and allowing for the construction of housing in your community, a builder can come in and propose a development. And as long as 20% of those units are affordable at 60 to 80% AMI, depending upon rentals or home ownership, you have to approve the permit for that project to move forward. We've recently seen some really great progress in California with this model. And I think it's a real great direct mechanism and link to them not actually acting in good faith and abiding by the law. Unfortunately, that bill did not pass this year. We also introduced, and I think you're going to hear later from Representative Strom Peterson, the chair of the Housing Committee, that was more specifically focused on cities not allowing for and obstructing the creation of permanent supportive housing, which, to be clear, is a violation of state law. But again, we don't have mechanisms to actually stop that from happening and holding them accountable. Both of those bills actually ended up dying. But what I am proud of is that the chair of the Housing Committee in the House introduced that piece of legislation, which is a huge culture shift for us. And both of those bills passed out of the Housing Committee themselves. There wasn't as much bipartisan support for these pieces of legislation like there was last year with House Bill 1110, middle housing. That's not surprising to me, but I think one of the things that we continue to struggle with is a lot of elected officials in the legislature are former city council members, and they defer a lot to what city councils say. And we did hear a lot of negative criticism and pushback and opposition to both of these bills. And so what my message is, we are in a housing crisis. It's disproportionately impacting the most vulnerable people in our communities, including low-income people and people of color and chronically unhoused individuals. And it's also broadening its impact to families that are working, family wage jobs. My little sister, who's a nurse, who cannot find a home with two people at a two-person income. My partner and I just went to try to buy a home. Both have very, good, I have two jobs and he's a firefighter. We can't afford a home in our community. And so this is broadening out and impacting more than just the most vulnerable among us. I do think we have to focus specifically on the most vulnerable, and it really frustrates me to no end that we have laws like House Bill 1220 that require cities to make it legal to build permanent supportive housing, and they're obstructing that. It's antithetical to our goals as a state and at the city council level. And so what we have to do is we have to be pro-housing. All of our policies, pro-housing, pro-housing, pro-housing. And for years, local governments and at the state level, the conversation has been dominated by folks that don't want more housing. The people that are already housed being asked, do you want more housing? We really have to change that conversation to talk about this being an essential need that all of our community members have to have. Everyone needs a home. It's absolutely essential for every single person. You have to have a home to survive. So we shouldn't be talking about a housing emergency and then having these theoretical conversations about, design review, or should we do this or should we do that? We have to say yes to all forms of housing. That's what needs to change. And that's what we are working on slowly. Some bills that I was proud of this year, some of the questions you asked me, I was really proud to see the co-housing bill by Representative Mia Gregerson pass that legalizes what used to be referred to as boarding houses. That's kind of a negative connotation and term, but what we need to do is we need to make it legal to build more different types of homes that are smaller and more economical. And I think that's a really great opportunity, especially for conversion of commercial properties into residential, which we desperately need. We also saw a bill that will allow for more parking flexibility, Senate Bill 6015, which is really great because parking is, when we prioritize and have minimum parking requirements, it prioritizes cars over people, and in high opportunity areas, it makes no sense for us to do that. There was also House Bill 2071, which reforms our building codes to make sure that we're having building codes that allow for the construction of middle housing, and that middle housing isn't considered a higher level of housing, commercial housing, which before and currently it does. If it's over a certain number of units, it's considered commercial. That's a regulatory burden that is unnecessary and will prohibit the creation of more affordable housing. And then lastly, House Bill 1054, which prohibits HOAs, homeowners associations, from discriminating against people that are not relatives of the person that live in those homes. Again, this is just something that needed to go. It's really low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, but I'm really excited that that passed. In thinking about next year, I will be reintroducing my bill, the Housing Accountability Act. My hope is that I can build a broad coalition during this interim with all the folks that are interested and supportive of housing. We have to demonstrate that this is impacting all of our communities and that we have broad support from various organizations, labor, environmental organizations, housing association or organizations, associations that advocate on behalf of our unhoused neighbors, health organizations, et cetera. It's so intersectional that that really will be possible. I didn't have an opportunity to do that last year because I was kind of resting after 11/10, but going into 2025, I'm really excited about building that coalition again, and I hope that you can be a part of it. Another bill that I want to introduce is the Cafes and Neighborhoods bill. We saw that introduced in the House this year, and it unfortunately did not make it in the Senate. So hopefully I'll be able to introduce that in the Senate next year as a companion to the House version of that bill. And that just says to cities, you have to make it legal for neighborhood cafes to be able to exist, including if you want to get an adult beverage as well. I think it really makes sense. We want to have livable, walkable communities, and we also want to reduce people driving, including when they're drinking. So I think it makes a lot of sense. It'll be good for economic development, livability, all the things. It's insane to me that there are organizations that are opposed to it, but we did see that this year, mainly the cities. And then lastly, I'll be introducing a bill that will eliminate minimum parking requirements statewide, because that has been something we have not been able to crack into. And so I'm going to introduce it, and hopefully we can see some progress on that as well. I think lastly, I'll just say that, it continues to surprise me that in 2024, when we're in a housing crisis, where we're short 250,000 homes, that we're having these conversations like that we're not in a crisis. We simultaneously say we're in a crisis, but then we don't advance policies that are obvious solutions to what the problem is. And so we have to be adamant, we have to be engaged, and we have to talk to our elected officials and really demand that they take action on housing, including all different types of housing policies, because it's a holistic, in thinking about our unhoused neighbors, when we have more housing that's affordable for working families, that's going to help alleviate some of that burden on the lower end of the income spectrum, that housing, because it's an ecosystem and it's all connected. At the same time, we need to vastly increase our support for really vulnerable folks that need housing first, permanent supportive housing with services. We need to increase those services in our communities. They're not up to par right now currently, and we're working on that. I'm on the healthcare committee too. So I'm excited about the progress that we can make. Happy to answer any questions if we have time.
Thank you so much, Representative Bateman. We have time for maybe one question if anybody has questions in the audience. You answered all the questions that I emailed you already, so so we're ahead of the game. Awesome. Well, you are more than welcome to stick around. Oh, Claire, please go ahead.
Hi. I'm wondering if you could just talk briefly about where the Association of Cities and Counties are on this stuff, and how we as advocates can work with our local governments to say, look, right, housing is a huge need everywhere in our state. Sure, you have here, but.
So I'm a former city council person. I was there for 5 years as a city council member, and I served on the planning commission for 3 prior to that. And I interned for the city prior to that. So I'm very well steeped in and love our local governments. However, I do think we're in a crisis. It's just like the climate crisis. The planet's on fire. We need to move quickly, adeptly. We don't have time to go city by city. We have 260 cities in Washington state. So I don't think that you should spend your time really advocating a lot at the local level. What I would love to see, unless you have an organized and there's an initiative at the local level that's being worked on, and you have support and there's effort and energy around it with a specific outcome in mind, then yes, organize, advocate, and spend your time there. However, absent that, which is very labor intensive, the state level is really where we need to take this action, because the state has jurisdiction over all these cities. What we need to do is we need to get folks, on these little housing bills, we need to be organized so they don't fly under the radar. So we have folks from all different organizations signing in to demonstrate The only person opposed, the only organization is the Association of Washington Cities, and we have 50 other organizations that are all a yes. That really helps show that disparity and lets our elected officials know. In addition, we have to write letters to the editor, we have to be organized. House Bill 1110, we did that. We had a really great team of organizations at the grassroots and the grass tops levels. That takes a lot of effort and energy. So the other thing I think we need to do is going into 2025, we have to have a portfolio, a package of housing bills. We can't operate independently and try to achieve our individual goals on housing independently. We're going to not, our strength is in numbers and our strength is together as a coalition. And it's more supportive of the actual solution, which is a holistic one. It's behavioral health and permanent supportive housing. It's parking reform. It's affordable housing. It's all of these things working together with the objective of getting people housed. So we need to have a package of like 10 bills that we can stand behind. And hopefully, ideally, it would be bipartisan and say, we're in an emergency, we're in a crisis, here is our solution, and we want these things to happen. And then when we have our bills going to committees, you can sign in and support, and we have all those other organizations as well.
Thank you so much, Representative Bateman. We do need to move on to our next guest. We're very happy to have Representative Strom Peterson joining us. Representative Peterson is the chair of the Housing Committee. He represents the 21st Legislative District. He's the sponsor of House Bill 2474, which Representative Bateman mentioned, that also would have prevented cities from discriminating against housing and shelter, and was also the sponsor of House Bill 2007, which passed, although in sort of a pared down version of it, extended TANF time limit extensions. So Representative Peterson, I will hand it off to you. Thank you so much.
Clicking buttons. There we go. Okay.
We can hear you and see you now.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you again, everybody. And thanks, Representative Bateman. You'll always be Representative Bateman to us for the work. I do want to give a lot of credit to Jess because she did have the issues around permanent supportive housing in House Bill 2113 when she first drafted it. And when we kind of hit this crisis situation, everybody keeps calling it the Kenmore bill. It's not the Kenmore bill. I was actually on a phone call with the city of Des Moines when I and a couple of others came up with this idea of this kind of emergent need to support housing. So Jess graciously said, yeah, let's split the two out so we can, because we knew that 2113 is complicated and there was probably a bill that was going to take a year or two. So we thought maybe we can take the emergency situation of 2474 and put it in a separate bill. So just appreciate how Jess has this kind of holistic look at things and is really ready to, do the work and get creative. So thank you, Representative Bateman. Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, I guess on 2474, I guess the positive is that I can't remember what day I wrote that bill. It was a Saturday, late in session, as you can tell by the bill number. And really, it started as a messaging bill. This was hey, we're paying attention. We're going to come down with the hammer. And that was kind of the thinking, because I was on this, if you don't know, Des Moines was trying to shut down a currently run facility by Catholic Community Services, a hotel that's been operating there for a couple of years. So that was kind of the initial idea. And then after we drafted it and we're looking at it, and we got some, of course, some panicked messages from our good friends at the Association of Washington Cities and others, we kind of realized that there was actually something here, that this actually could be a piece of legislation if we kind of spent more than the first 20 minutes of drafting the bill. So worked really hard with some allies to come up with what we thought was actually a pretty reasonable solution. We brought in the cities, talked to the Association of Washington Cities, and really with some of the city partners, we got them to at least neutral, because as Jessica was saying, the idea is simple. It's like, here's a state law. You need to follow the state law. if you don't follow the state law, these are the penalties that we can impose. It's like, it is not a radical idea. As we all think, it was a pretty radical idea for a lot of people in the cities. But you know, we got it out of the House. Of course, I think part of the issue this year, obviously, it was a short session, but even the structure of the short session this year, and this is really inside wonky baseball, but seemed really, really tight. The housing committee, or the public, whatever, local government committee that it went to in the Senate had 1 day to hear bills and 1 day to exec bills. So trying to socialize this idea to a committee that's already challenging when it comes to, I think, some more progressive ideas, kind of, I think, to Jessica's point about, you know, people that had served on city councils and really listened to their city councils or city government folks. Anyway, so despite I think that the chair really tried to get this moving, but we couldn't get it out of committee. But it went a long ways in 21 days. So we'll be back. Obviously, we still need this. I mean, I think there was an article in today's paper, you know, by Danny Westneat, just talking about, you know, luckily, hey, Redmond, good for you, Redmond, stepping up to do that, to do the project that was ultimately rejected out of Kenmore. Hopefully they can stick to it after another just gruesome city council meeting of people saying horrible things. And I served on city council as well, so certainly understand the pressures, but and I think that's one of the reasons we need legislation like this, because when I was on the city council and we were dealing with housing things and there were ideas in Olympia, I was like, yeah, go for it, because I would much rather point at my then representative Mark Elias and say, yeah, it's all his fault, because there's like a level of, and he was like, yeah, exactly. So again, to Jess's point, statewide action is really what's needed on these. I think, you know, when somebody asked about, you know, what can we do, kind of, I think, Claire, maybe you asked about, you know, city by city organizing. I think part of it is just, you know, sometimes in this, where you live, if you have, you know, access or know some folks, see what they think. Like I had a, you know, kind of a relatively random conversation with Mayor Franklin in Everett. And she was like, you know, we love 2474 because we think we as a city are trying to do this work and other cities are not. King County, you know, testified in favor. So I think we need to find those cities that are doing the right thing, and they're realizing, and this also, the article today also touches on that if a lot of cities say, well, we need a regional approach, and it's, well, okay, fine, but you're part of the region, so you need to be part of the approach. And I live in, you know, certainly one of the epicenters of NIMBYism in Edmonds. So I think that's kind of the thing, is to try to find the allies as we kind of broaden this coalition. Are there city council members, mayors, other people involved in that would kind of support this work, because they're trying to do the right thing. And unless they get their neighboring cities to also do the right thing, that puts added pressure on them. So I think that's one avenue that we can take. Yeah, so somewhat pleased with as far as it went, but and we'll be back. We'll fine tune it. I think it's actually a pretty simple, and I think we came up with a pretty good solution, but, you know, we'll work on it over the interim. And, you know, I don't think we ever get the Association of Washington Cities to yes on this. I mean, because I think if we do, then the bill probably doesn't do very much. But again, I think we just have to stand strong. And I, you know, I've worked with Carl and the folks at AWC for a long time, and I would not want that job. It's what, 260 cities. That's a lot of opinions and a lot of, so sometimes you've got to, you know, work on the squeakiest wheels, but we'll be back with that. And I think there's a lot of momentum behind this idea, but there are some pretty stiff headwinds as these projects get working. And I think a lot of our local governments have become more conservative over the last few years. around this issue. And I'm going to put something in the chat, speaking of local governments. Just as an aside, wearing my county hat, those of you who don't know, I serve on the Snohomish County Council. Just put a link in the chat to a proposed ordinance that might have the votes. I think it does. That's going to mandate testing of methamphetamines and other things in permanent supportive housing county-owned buildings. So we bought 2 hotels that are now being rehabbed to create, permanent supportive housing. And we also have a handful of pallet shelters. So this bill, at least as written, would demand annual testing on all units, both residential units and public spaces. It specifically spells out methamphetamines and says, or other substances, so they can also test for mold and fentanyl and, asbestos. I think my concern is I think this is kind of a direct attack on the Housing First model. I think there are some real issues with privacy, but like I said, I think the bill, well, I'm sure the bill has the votes right now to pass. So if any of you out there want to take a look at that link, and if there are things in there that we can maybe make it a little less awful, that I think I could get a few amendments on the bill. If you look at item number 5 is the one that really concerns me, where the testing information will be given to the county council. That's where I think that can really be weaponized. It's like, oh, see, we told you these places are contaminated with meth all the time, people. Anyway, take a look. I'm sending this out to a handful of other folks to get some input, but it's happening, could happen as soon as next week. I'm trying to delay it just to get a little more information, but any help on that front would be great, speaking of local governments. And then I guess just real quickly, we signed House Bill 2007, a very much skinny down version of broad TANF reform, which happened, I can't remember the bill number last year, which was a very skinny down version of broader TANF reform. But, we're chipping away. And I think we're also socializing the issue a little bit more. And it's becoming, it seems to be less and less of certainly of a partisan fight. People are just understanding a little bit more I think the misdirection that we took, especially in the 90s, about poverty and, that kind of, oh, you've got to work and do all these things. It's like, well, being poor is really hard, right? It's a lot of work. So a decent step, proud of the work that you all did on this. It's going to help some families, but I think, again, short session, there was a lot of back and forth as to how much this was going to cost. And I think we just kind of erred on, well, we're going to keep the costs down. And I think by the time the bill passed, it was like, well, we're really not investing a ton of money into this, but at least, again, we're going to help some, socializing the issue a little bit more. So we'll be back again. I think Anna said that, yeah, we'll definitely be back with the big package again next year. And again, full budget cycle. We certainly have some folks on the House Appropriations Committee that are, fully committed to this, and some pretty significant changes are going to happen on the Ways and Means Committee and have happened, to where I think that penalizing poor people mentality of that kind of 90s era is certainly diminished greatly. So I'm a little more hopeful that the Senate budget writers will be a little more accommodating as well.
Thank you so
And so
much,
that's it.
Representative Peterson. Really appreciate you joining us, and really appreciate your support for both the TANF time limit extension and also for making sure that we can get the housing and shelter that we need in cities. I think you gave a great example of how important it is to advocate at the county level. You also have a room full of really powerful city level advocates in this room. So just want to appreciate the work that everyone is doing to make sure that cities cite affordable housing and shelter. So thank you so much for joining us. We're running a little bit late on time, so I'm wondering, is it okay if folks put questions in the chat for you, Representative Peterson?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Excellent. Okay. And so if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. And very happy to introduce next Senator Patty Kuderer from the 48th Legislative District. She was a sponsor of this year of Senate Bill 5908, a co-sponsor, which provided extended foster care for youth who are aging out of the foster care system, ages 18 to 21, and was also supportive of a bill out of the House that passed this year that provides housing for youth leaving behavioral health inpatient care. So Senator Kuderer, thank you so much for joining us. Please take it away.
Thank you. And before I start, I just want to just tell you, give you a deep thank you for all of your advocacy, the testimony, the emails, all of that makes such a difference when we're trying to pass housing policy. So thank you for your work. And you know, my approach to this, since we created the Housing Committee several years ago, was to make sure we were collaborating with the House. You heard from two representatives who I've worked very closely with in terms of packages of housing bills that we've been able to get over the finish line over the last several years. We've also made record investments in the Housing Trust Fund in order to help create more affordable housing around the state. But as you heard, there is still more work to be done. And one of the things that we did in the Senate right out of the gate is we started looking at the different, what we called unique populations of folks who are experiencing homelessness, because we know that people are not homeless for the same reason. And one in particular, youth, that's one that we've been focusing on. And as you know, in 2015, Washington State created the Office of Homeless Youth. And with the whole goal of ending youth homelessness in our state. So we've made some significant strides in that area. We still have more work to do, but in 2018, we passed a Senator Darneal bill, 6560. You might remember that one, which as a state, we made a promise that we would not let youth and young adults exiting our public systems of care, like our foster system and our juvenile rehabilitation system, to be discharged into homelessness. And in 2022, we built upon that work with House Bill 1905 to help ensure that youth and young adults are connected to services and resources to increase their housing stability. And now in 2024, we built on that again. And one of the things in the Senate is that housing is not, there's a lot of housing in the Housing Committee for sure, but it's also, there's housing in Senator Claire Wilson's under her jurisdiction in her committee, and also in Senator Lovett's committee in local government. And just so you know, those two chairs and I, we work very collaboratively as well on housing issues, which I think has helped get a lot of significant policy passed over the last several years. And in this case, it was Senate Bill 5908, Senator Claire Wilson bill. And what this did is it built on the existing extended foster care system for youth ages 18 to 21. It adds a supervised independent living subsidy as an option for these youth as an alternative to a licensed foster care placement. This was really critical. This is something that we heard from young people, and listening to those with lived experience makes all the difference when you're forming these kinds of policies. And that came directly from young people. And it also expands eligibility for these services and makes the program an opt-out rather than an opt-in. So this existing program it's absolutely critical to preventing homelessness amongst our youth exiting foster care. And we're making sure that more Washingtonians have access to it. I was on the National Council of State Legislators Youth Homelessness Fellows Program this year, and this bill was actually discussed quite a bit about how we can extend help to our foster youth to slow the rate of homelessness that can occur when they exit the system. House Bill 1929, that is a bill that supports young adults following inpatient behavioral health treatment. There was, this was a unanimous bill coming out of the Senate. And I believe it was unanimous coming out of the House as well, but don't quote me on that. But what that bill does is it creates a post-inpatient housing program for young adults within the healthcare authority. At least 2 residential programs, one in Eastern Washington and one in Western Washington with 6 to 10 beds each, serves eligible individuals for up to 90 days. And importantly, these are voluntary programs, so no one's being forced into treatment. This is a costly program. We allocated nearly $1.5 million in the supplemental operating budget to fund the program. And in a supplemental year, that is a lot of money. But it also underscores the commitment that the legislature has to ensuring that our youth have homes. So we know that these are our state's most vulnerable young adults. Almost 80% of 18 to 24-year-olds exiting inpatient care end up facing homelessness within 12 months. And with this legislation, we're providing an alternative emergency shelter along with support to help these young people transition to long-term housing. One of the things we also did prior to this session is we passed a bill that actually did something very simple. It was my bill to raise the age of eligibility for the housing vouchers through the Office of Youth Homelessness to age 24. And we did that because we found that within exiting the foster system, roughly a third of foster youth ended up being homeless within a year. And we're supposed to be getting a report back next year on that bill to see what strides we've made in keeping young people housed. We know this is critical, especially if they are in any kind of ongoing education. It's essential for them to stay in housing in order to maintain their education. You've heard of the school to prison pipeline. I don't have to explain that to any of you, but that is what we were trying to address with these kinds of fixes. The other thing we did was direct cash assistance to foster youth. And every time we run up against the argument and the narrative that if you give young people money, they're going to spend it on drugs and alcohol. But the data doesn't show us that at all. The data shows us that they spent it on housing, they spent it on gas, they spent it on groceries, they spent it on housing. That's what the data shows us. And it was really, really compelling. And the more working sessions that we have on these kinds of programs, the more minds that we're changing. Now, it's a slow process. In the Senate, we've had our challenges. And for me this year, the biggest disappointment was not getting rent stabilization passed. That bill will be coming back next year. And the legislature is going to look very different next year. And I think in a way that makes it more likely than not that bill will pass. I know Senator Trudeau, who prime sponsored it in the Senate, is absolutely committed to that bill. And I'm going to do whatever I can to help her get that over the finish line. So I know you're running behind in time, and I'll give you some time back. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I just want to thank you again for your advocacy, for all your work. It is so incredibly important. And I'm really proud to have you as a partner in this work. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Senator Kuderer, for joining us and for helping us get our timeline back on track. Is it okay for folks to ask you some questions in the chat?
Of course.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for all your work. You've really done a huge amount for youth and preventing youth homelessness. So I know this group really is appreciative of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the segue also into House Bill 2114. I'm very pleased to welcome Representative Nicole Macri from the 43rd Legislative District. Nicole is very kind to jump out of a work meeting to join us today, so definitely want to be respectful of your time. Representative Macri was a co-sponsor of House Bill 2114 for rent stabilization. That did not pass this year, but made it very far in the process, and also was a sponsor of House Bill 2329, which will study the really high insurance rates that housing providers are facing right now. So thank you so much, Representative Macri. We'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Haley. And I think my internet is a little choppy, so hopefully you all can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear and see you just fine.
Okay, great, perfect, thank you. It's just wonderful to be here, and I'm really grateful for all the advocacy from this group and thousands of individuals from across the state. As Senator Kuderer alluded to, we made really good strides on rent stabilization this year, and that was the direct result of amazing advocacy and organizing across the state. This is not a new issue. It's one that we've been bringing forward for several years, but we made the greatest strides this year than we ever have. But we did not get it across the finish line. But as Senator Kuderer said, we are very well teed up to do so next year. So folks can understand the significance of the movement that we made. Really, every step of the way, we were very much focused on propelling the bill to its next step. And I think we surprised many people in getting the bill, a very strong bill with strong policy, out of the House and over to the Senate with a very strong vote from Democrats. Historically, we've been told that moderate members of the Democratic caucus would not be interested, folks in swing districts would not be interested in supporting tenant protections. What we found this year is that when legislators hear from their constituents about the struggles that they have, it can really overpower and outweigh the opposition fear-based messaging. There is a lot of fear-based messaging from the opposition about rent stabilization, but the stories of need and the work that we did to demonstrate the reasonableness of this stabilization policy really helped us get very far. And it was just honestly a small number of senators who were unwilling to move the bill that stymied it in the Senate. We did have and continue to have strong support in the Senate as well. And as Senator Kuderer said, there are going to be a number of retirements in the Senate and new members coming in. And so looking forward to 2025, our work in number one is to make sure that anyone who is working to get elected understands the importance of this issue to the people in their district. So just doing education with all candidates about the policy issues is going to be essential. And then continuing a huge push on advocacy. I will say, I think we surprised opponents to this bill by the force of advocacy behind it, and it will be so essential to sustain and build on the strength of the advocacy. And so those are going to be the main factors that get us there and keep the bill as strong as it was when it moved to the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate. And I'm glad to answer questions about that. You mentioned as well the bill that I worked on related to property insurance and the struggles that we know that our low-income housing providers are having. That really is a first step to try to build some solutions to address this problem. The insurability in the residential sector, the challenges that we're seeing in low-income housing are not unique only to housing for people who are low income or formerly homeless. We're seeing instability across residential insurance across the country, and there's a number of factors why that is, but we are seeing the most acute challenges in multifamily housing and in affordable subsidized housing, and particularly in supportive housing. And so we thought it was very important to create an opportunity to really study the problem in greater depth so we can really come forward with more sophisticated solutions. That bill was done in coordination with a budget move that we also did to help stabilize our housing providers. Representative Emily Alvarado advocated for a urgent repair fund for affordable housing in the capital budget, and we got that in there at $5 million. So it's a one-time emergency fund to assist providers who have urgent repairs, and it goes hand in hand with this issue around figuring out the insurance challenges, because many providers have been struggling with their insurance deductibles and insurance claims. So those are the big things. I'm glad to talk about other budget wins. I'm not sure if you've already reviewed those, but in addition to the work that I did as part of the team on rent stabilization, along with Representatives Peterson, Senator Kuderer, Senator Trudeau, Rep Alvarado, Rep Rammel. We had just such an amazing team on rent stabilization this year. I spend the majority of my time during legislative session working to help build our state's operating budget. I'm glad to talk about stuff there as well, unless you've already covered it.
We haven't. If you could briefly maybe give us a highlight of the budget, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll start with capital budget, because I think we often focus on capital budget because we know the solution to homelessness is housing, and we need a lot more housing. So we've got to build a lot more housing. We saw record-breaking increases in the Housing Trust Fund again this year, particularly in a supplemental year, second year of the biennium, over $120 million in the Housing Trust Fund. That builds on top of the $400 million that we did last year. So we are continuing to increase the state investment in building new housing. I mentioned the Urgent Repair Fund, $5 million. We also had $55 million in climate resiliency dollars to help retrofit our affordable housing funded with Housing Trust Fund dollars. So doing the necessary upgrades to become more energy efficient and climate resilient, and try to get ahead of the Clean Building Act requirements that go into effect in future years. That is a significant investment. It comes out of the Climate Commitment Act. And I will note the Climate Commitment Act will be on the ballot through initiative this November. And if the Climate Commitment Act is repealed, that investment for retrofitting our stock of affordable housing and many hundreds of millions of other dollars of investments will go away. So just want to put a plug in there for that, being aware of that, the connectivity of the Climate Commitment Act to the work that you all do. On the operating side of the budget, where I spend most of my time, the most significant investments are the ones to both address the local shortfall related to the document recording fee, meaning that over time we've seen fewer document recordings related to real estate, and we've seen a downward trend in revenue in the document recording fees. So we invest $25 million statewide there to make sure that local communities like King County can request from the state dollars to backfill any shortfalls that they receive from their projections on document recording fees. So this is for the full array of homelessness response services at the county level. And then we did a one-time add on top of that of $12 million specifically for King County. That was part of a $35 million add for local regions across the state to assist with other financial pressures besides the document recording fee that are putting the sustainability of homelessness services in jeopardy. So that includes the inflationary pressures that all of our providers are experiencing, as well as the sunsetting of one-time federal COVID relief dollars, which were helping to hold our homelessness response system together in most areas around the state, and certainly true in King County. So altogether, $60 million to just stabilize and maintain homelessness services. We did significant investments in the area of substance use disorder, and particularly opioid use disorder responses as a crisis that we know disproportionately impacts people experiencing homelessness. The overdose rates are the greatest among people who are homeless. So we'll see increased investments in King County's street medicine team, increased investments in Department of Health naloxone distribution, and significant increases in treatment availability as well. And let me just take a look at my little list here to see if there's another couple things I could highlight. On top of that, we heard from those providers who are deliverers of the foundational community supports. That's our 1115 waiver of supportive housing services, Medicaid funded supportive housing services. We got good feedback about some of the barriers to eligibility assessment for clients who are seeking FCS services. And so thanks to Representative Chop, we have a one-time investment of $500,000 to create a better portal for streamlining eligibility. That gets kind of in the weeds, but it's really essential. The policymakers, we usually have these great ideas about how things are going to play out. We create these great new programs, but the implementation doesn't always pan out as we anticipate. And so getting that feedback is essential, and then making those incremental improvements along the way is so key. So that level of detailed engagement and developing champions in the legislature and working to push even small investments like a $500,000 one to help make sure that our foundational community supports program can work better is a small investment, but a good example of how your advocacy at all levels can really make a big difference. There's many, many other things that we invested in. And I think you're going to hear about some policy bills that had significant budget impact, including the child support pass-through policy, which we finally got passed, which is going to be a huge win for families across the state. And we were glad to be able for that to be one of the first bills passed out of the House this session, and then passed to final passage this year.
Thank you so much, Representative Macri. And that is an awesome segue to our next guest. But before we move to Leanna, I just want to say thank you so much to our legislators. You all are some of our strongest champions in the legislature for homelessness and housing and public benefits. And just we so appreciate all the work that you do. And thank you for joining us today. And next, very happy to welcome Leanna Cresson from Poverty Action. Leanna has a very exciting bill passage to celebrate with us that Poverty Action has been working on for a long, long time. That's the child support pass-through. So Leanna, I'll hand it to you.
Yes, hello everybody. Good to be with you today, and glad to be wrapping up this meeting with some great news. As you've heard, the child support pass-through for families on TANF finally passed this year, and I'm over the moon. So for some context, how this works and why it's a big deal. In a traditional child support situation, one parent pays the other parent child support, and that money goes right to the kid, as it should. Child support supports the children, it makes sense. And then if you're unable to pay, then eventually you still owe that person, and it all works out. But our state was doing this funny thing where if you needed help from TANF, or Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, a cash assistance program, then instead of parent A paying parent B, the state would instead intercept the money and use it as a revenue stream. And starting in 2020, they passed through some of the child support, but not all of it. It was only $50 for one of your kids, or $100 for 2 or more children. So the state was keeping almost all of this child support and using it as a revenue stream, taking it from low-income children, which is not our favorite thing that they have done. So they instead this year decided, you know what? Maybe child support should support children. It passed with really strong support out of the House and unanimously out of the Senate, and funded in the budget. Thank you, Representative Macri, making sure that got in there. And yes, it's the only slight downside is it doesn't go into effect until January of 2026. DSHS said they needed that time for it to work out tech-wise to make it all happen smoothly. So the state will be using low-income children as a revenue source for 2 more years. But then after that, no longer. So we're excited about the passage. Wish it was implemented yesterday, but we're taking it as a win.
Thank you so much, Leanna, and huge congratulations. That's a big effort that Poverty Action has been pushing for a long, long time. If you haven't signed up for their, yes, in collaboration for sure. Would definitely recommend signing up for their action alerts as well as ours. If you haven't already, they do a lot of really good work. So Leanna, thank you so much. Is it okay, Leanna, if people put questions in the chat for you?
You bet.
Awesome. And with that, I want to send it over to Tim for member announcements. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It is amazing to be able to have so many champions doing like admirable work in one room. I love our legislative recaps. Yay. Yeah, so this is the time in the meeting where we work amongst ourselves to talk about program updates, share resources, say hello if you want to make a quick message to other members. I have a quick announcement that is relevant to any nonprofits working in a lot of cities in Northeast or South Seattle. The Share One app, otherwise known as Human Services Collaborative Funding, is the RFP process is open. The application link and website for more information is in the chat. It's hosted by the City of Redmond, but it's not just City of Redmond. You can qualify for these funds if you operate human services in the cities of Auburn, Burien, Bellevue, Covington, Des Moines, Federal Way, Issaquah, Kenmore, Kent, Kirkland, Redmond, Renton, Sammamish, SeaTac, Shoreline, or Tukwila. So a lot of communities have access to this money. There are funding requirements that are unique to each city. So if you want to apply for this, go to the website and there is information for each city, what they require. And there is contact information for each city so that you can find more information from the respective city you work in. That is open until the 8th. Folks have some time to approach this funding if they haven't already. And you know, it's helpful to find whatever money we can get to keep doing these like essential services. So if you haven't already, check it out. And I would like to pass it to anyone else who would like to come off mute and share on behalf of their organization or themselves.
And I'm just going to take a sec. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. So thanks for being here, everybody.